Okay, so what I want to look at is this whole area of inclusive webinars and online learning. Now, just a little bit of background for this. I'm going to switch on auto captions. They will not give you 100% accessibility, but they can be helpful. I would also make the point that they can sometimes be amusing and distracting in equal measure. So if you don't find them helpful, try not to look at them. But certainly some people can find them helpful, and you don't have to be hearing impaired to find them helpful. Sometimes you might be interrupted by a young child coming into the room and asking for something, and you just want to be able to glance back at the screen and see what's been talked about. So they are there. Secondly, the presentation that we're going through is all available online, so I'll give you the link for that afterwards. Thirdly, in terms of a lot of the core resource that we're going to be exploring this afternoon, they come from the Future Teacher series, and there's two particular resources we'll be looking at from that series. And they are Creative Commons, they're freely available, and again, I'll give you links for those as we go through. So in terms of, do I need to make lots of notes as I go through? You don't, because there's a lot of scaffolding around the session. The second point is that there's going to be a fair bit of toing and froing through the text chat. So again, I want to make the point that what I'm really, really interested in is your thoughts and your comments and your experiences. I could not care less about your spelling. So if you are dyslexic or you're just a bit slow and clumsy on the keyboard when you're having to do things fast, don't worry, because what I'm interested, so long as I can kind of interpret what you're writing, that's all that matters. We're not going to judge your professionalism by the number of keystrokes that you hit whilst trying to multitask. So let's begin. And the first thing I want to begin with is to get something from you. So in the text chat pane now, I want you to think over any online delivery experience you have maybe at the moment in particular with students, but I want us to consider it from two perspectives. First of all, a barrier. What kind of barriers are you finding? What kind of barriers have you come across that may impact maybe on all students, maybe on some students, maybe students with disabilities, maybe students without disabilities? What are the barriers that online learning is facing you and your students with? But also, as you consider that, also there are benefits that some students will be experiencing over a traditional face-to-face engagement. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple of minutes so that you can pop things in the text chat, and I want to have a look at that and comment on them as they come in. So thank you. Excellent. We've got things coming in thick and fast already. Brilliant. Keep going. And do feel free to think of new ones and add them in. What's very interesting is there's this big range coming in. We've got some technical issues, technical barriers, time zone, that's a really interesting one. Isolation, lack of peer support, lack of traveling to campus, Zoom fatigue. That's a great neologism. You're planning activities with a new format, that's a really interesting one. And hopefully today you go away with some ideas on new types of activities. Plagiarism, yes, that's interesting. I like the idea of people, Lucila's talking there about time to think before they answer and contribute. I really like that because for a lot of people, there's a quote I came across recently that introverts think to speak and extroverts speak to think. And very often face-to-face engagements are dominated by the extroverts as they're doing their thinking through their tongues, and that can often be quite off-putting for people who are much shyer or quieter. Let's have a look at more concentrating on the content without being distracted by others. Yeah, of course they may be distracted by social media instead. So there's some really good things there. I won't 29 new messages. This is fantastic. Just so I'm going to be quiet for a minute. Just have a look at what one another has put there. Scroll up and down the list. I'll be quiet for 30 seconds. If you've got more to put in there, put them in there, because we'll be able to save the chat at the end, and it's really useful. The value of this is not you listening to me, but you listening to each other as well. Okay, that's been a brilliant start. Thank you very much for that. And that will be a rich resource for you to have a look at afterwards, particularly because I think when you go down the whole list of benefits that you haven't thought of, there'll be benefits that people have mentioned that you can suddenly think, yeah, I haven't done that in my teaching. I haven't enabled or haven't capitalized on my students' ability to benefit from that. So that can influence your teaching. Equally, when there's barriers, if you see the same kind of barriers, at least you know you're not alone. And it may also be an opportunity for you to, take things upwards to, to line managers and so on, and say, look, I know that these are particular barriers we're having. Maybe I need some training in it. Maybe we need, alternative tools or resources. So it's a mix. That's the first thing that we can say. Now, what I want to look at next is let's just have a look at, not looking at any one particular type of resource. So this isn't about Zoom, it's not about Blackboard Collaborate or any other tool you might use. What I've done here is I've collected together a range of different options that you find on lots of different platforms. Now, not all platforms will have all of these, but it's a really useful resource. So I'm going to just open that up quickly. And this is, I'll give you the link to this in a moment because you're going to actually be doing a little interactivity on here. But so you'll have access to this to look at it in more detail. But I think the first thing, I think one of you was talking about the issue that it can be a bit harder to know pedagogically what you can do in this new world of online learning. And things can become a little bit sameish. So on this resource, you can find for each of the different elements on the screen here, you've got a couple of key points. And if you want more information, a little bit more detail underneath it. And so we can think about what you can do with polls, what you can do with text chat. There's a number of webinars I've done, guest webinars, where they've had text chat switched off, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. There's two pet hates for online sessions with me. One is not knowing who else is in the session, and the other one is not being able to see what other people's comments are and add my own. I might be, that might be a high horse of my own, but it's something that really annoys me because it's such a powerful tool if you use it effectively. Chat pods are slightly different, and the thing about chat pods that make it different from text chat is that the exercise we did just now with the text chat, where I said put in benefits, put in barriers, if I had a chat pod facility, I would have been able to put two little kind of text boxes on the screen, one saying benefits, one saying barriers, and it just gives you a little bit more organization, and it gives you more ways of kind of getting people to think in a structured way. The participant list, this is an interesting one because I've been doing some preparation this morning for another webinar where I'm looking very much at emotional and affective and social elements that support learning. And one of the things that can be very significant and is often missed is that that simple thing of participant list. Who else is in here? Am I in here with 3 people or with 30 people? And the way I respond might be hugely determined by whether it's 3 people or whether it's 30 people. So do be aware of the participant list, and do think about how you might use that effectively. Whiteboards, some of you will have access to whiteboards. Can I just, in the text chat pane, because we're now moving away from the, yes, everybody's probably done some of these other things. We're now moving into some of the bits that are not quite so common. If you have used a whiteboard tool on a webinar before, can you just pop a quick yes into the text chat pane? Okay, so Elizabeth has, Katia, okay. Quite a few of you. Okay, that's brilliant. So could you just, if you have done, could you just take 30 seconds to pop into there how you've used it? And while you're doing that, I'll just sort of mention the ways I tend to use it, so that if people haven't used it, they're not sitting waiting for typing to be done. So if you could type that in. Thanks, Eugene, that's great. So one of the ways I use a whiteboard when I'm using a tool that has a whiteboard attached is, quite often, in my context, I don't necessarily know the students like you would do, because I'm tending to do things like this. But one of the things I'll often do at the beginning is I'll bring up a map and I'll say, draw on the map where you are, where you live. Or I can use, in other kind of circumstances, I might be trying to get a sense of how confident somebody is with a particular skill or a particular understanding, and so I can draw some swim lanes on a PowerPoint slide, and I'll say, okay, mark with a little, mark with your initials or a little cross or something where you fit along these different swim lanes on this graph. So those are some of the ways. So let's have a look at what we've got here. We've got on-screen script. So icebreaker activity, similar kind of thing. Training for Canvas, excellent. Brainstorming overview of main contributions about a theory. Okay, great. So a range of different pedagogical approaches to the whiteboard. The one thing, if you do use a whiteboard, you have to let people have time to be silly at the beginning, because it nearly always happens that people are silly at the beginning. So get all the silliness over with. That's why I tend to use it right at the beginning as an icebreaker. Things like audio. Now, these are not specifically, wow, I've got an audio feed on this webinar. It wouldn't be much of a webinar if it didn't have, but it's making sure, sorry, I've just realized you've lost the text chat bit because of opening that in a different pane. There we go. Not the text chat, the captions. So audio, really make sure that your audio is as clear as you can get it. Video, again, there's lots of pros and cons. Generally, I switch off videos when I'm presenting, because I have this theory, it reduces bandwidth for everybody, so it makes a smoother experience. I think increasingly that's not necessarily the case, but there are times when people just want to see a human being, especially if you've been in lockdown for 6 weeks. You just want to see what a person looks like. The screen share, again, great ways you can use screen share, file sharing, remote control. I'll go through the rest of these quite quickly because you can come back and look at any of them when I give you the link. Breakout rooms, other kinds of affordances that might be specific to your particular tool that you're using. And there are also alternative things where actually it's not all built around the webinar. And I think, again, I saw in some of the text chat earlier that it's not just about the webinar, it's about maybe you're using an online quiz as well, maybe you're using podcasts and so on. So have a think about that. So for most of the webinars I use, I have a supplementary resource like the link I am about to give you. And that's so that people can come back to it or interact with it. So let's just show you an example. This isn't a, yes, so we've done this one. So the one I'm going to show you now, I'll pop the link in the text chat. So this is the supplementary resource. Sorry, I've got the wrong page. This is the one I want you to do. And I'll pop this link in the text chat. Shirin, I think breakout rooms could be good for seminars. I've used them in training purposes very effectively. So I think I've just popped that text chat link. Have you got that? Yeah. So if you open up that link, now this isn't a really hard task for you to do. I don't want to insult your intelligence by making it look as if it's really stretching you. But what this is designed to do is two things: to make you think about how might you engage people at different points. So you've got through a bit of a webinar, you've done some talking to people, talking at people perhaps, and then you think, okay, I want to just embed that. I'll give them a quiz, or I'll just give them something to discuss. So this is a little drag and drop one. It's accessible to non-mouse users. You can do this just with the keyboard. So just have a quick go at those and then click on the check answers. But it's just also showing that you can have these tools that you can kind of be going off from the webinar environment into another environment. The tool I'm using here is Xerte Toolkits, which has got all sorts of functionality built into it. It's a free open source tool. But the nice thing is that I could have a Google form embedded in that. I could have some Google Slides, I could have some interactivities, some Mentimeter, some all kinds of different activities, but I'm not confusing the participant by them opening up 16 windows in front of them, because everything is embedded in that one resource. So they've got my screen and a resource screen. So have a quick go at that and see what you do. I'm not going to spend any more time on it because I want to get on, but considering I wrote this, but I didn't pay very much attention to what I was putting, I've done terribly. Okay, I've done terribly. That's the way it is when you're sometimes demonstrating. Okay, so let's then have a look. Let me check that I haven't missed anything. Oh yeah, I did want to also look at people as individuals. So the point of that slide was to show that people are very much individuals and people may have very different individual needs. But I also wanted this little bit I call humans at the heart. And these are just a few tips that you might find useful. Naming. Using people's names is so important because we tune in to our name. And you'll notice already as I've been looking at these the text chat, I haven't just been saying, oh, somebody said icebreaker activity word game. I've tried to say, Katia said this and Tony said that. I won't have name checked all of you by the end of the session, not with 48 people, but hopefully there will be enough of you name checked that those of you that didn't get name checked will be on your edge paying attention just in case you do get name checked. So think of names. This is just keeping it human. And in fact, you can do this loads more than you can in a traditional face-to-face lecture. Not least because in a traditional face-to-face lecture, I can't have 48 people at the same time contributing, or it would be cacophony. There's the nurturing bit. So people struggle to keep up, latecomers miss vital links, etc. So quite often if I see some latecomers have come in, I'll pop in the links because they don't always see earlier bits of the chat pane before they joined. People struggle to keep up because you change the slide before they're ready. So make sure that you've got the links that you give to them. Like I've just given you that link, you can now go through that resource backwards and forwards to catch up on something you may have missed. Again, people may feel insecure because you've just made this a brilliant comment in the text chat and the presenter has completely ignored it. Now, the likelihood is that the presenter didn't even spot it and it's actually gone down or gone up above the presenter's screen because of other things coming in. So again, trying to kind of encourage people just by simple phrases like, I may not be able to, to reflect on all of these. You notice earlier I said, you know, I can't go through all of these. I've had another 48 to read. Please take a few moments and read one another. So that's a way of keeping that nurturing of involvement. And webinars feel lonely, so you know, try to keep people active so that they feel they're part of it. And you know, where you get a chance, injecting a light touch wherever you can. So hopefully that's useful, because I think it can make you feel a lot better about online delivery once you begin to realize how online delivery has its own pedagogical benefits and its own social benefits, but you do have to tap into them and be deliberate about looking for them. So let's have a quick look then at what you can do if you want to plan an inclusive webinar. So again, these are kind of top level generic points for you to consider, and then I'm going to let you look at them in more detail when you've finished the session. Go back to these resources. The links are persistent. You can get back to them anytime. So again, maybe you missed that URL a moment ago. Now, the Learning Apps website isn't free, Elizabeth. The tool name for Andrea, the tool name is Xerte Toolkits. It's a tool, it's a bit, if you think of Moodle, it's free, it's open source, but somebody installs it on your server and then you as a non-technical person can use it. The Xerte Toolkits is very similar. So it's xerte.org.uk. It's a free open source server-based bit of software. It gets installed on your server. You authenticate to it through Moodle or Blackboard or whatever you have, and then it allows teachers with very limited technical skills to create the kinds of, well, the sorts of resources you're looking at now. I have zilch coding skills, but these can be put together just from templates. So planning inclusive webinars, right? So again, the key points, and I'll go through this fast because there's other things we're going to look at too, and I want time for you to be able to look at it later, go back and forwards at the bits that are particularly relevant to you. So what really helps generally is less of an issue for you, I suspect, in your context than it is for me in my context, but make sure that you know access needs in advance. If you're going to organize a webinar, it's really helpful if the registration form has an opportunity for people to declare any accessibility needs, and ideally a contact or phone number if they want to talk through how they could get the best experience. That doesn't mean to say that you offer them the impossible and tell them that oh, we'll have a sign language interpreter, we'll have all sorts of things, we'll be screen reader friendly, we'll be everything. You are working in constraints and limitations, but if you know what somebody's issues are beforehand, you can then come to a negotiated optimum that means that yes, it's sustainable, I can do it, and it's a reasonable adaptation, but equally, yes, I've gone out of my way to ensure that you're not going to face barriers that you needn't face. So that's, collect your information, know your students, know your participants, keep it active. That helps all kinds of learners by keeping it active. But do make sure the activities are clear and straightforward, and where possible, avoid people getting lost, because this is my 10th activity. It's opened in a new window. Now I can't even find where the Zoom window is. You want to avoid that. Accessible content. This is important. The slides that this is based on at the moment have all got detailed notes in the notes field, so that if there's any element where I'm relying on a diagram or an image, you can go in the notes field and see what that's about. So that's important. There are ways where making something more accessible for one person can make it less accessible for everybody else. Here's an example. I do some webinars with AbilityNet, and one of the things they discovered was when they had some blind participants, the blind participants were having their screen reader read out every time something new went in the text chat. Now you imagine earlier when you were all putting your contributions in, we had maybe in 20 seconds, we had maybe 39 contributions. Now, if you're hearing every single one of those read out to you as from your screen reader and trying to listen to the presenter at the same time, that is awful experience. So their approach was to switch off text chat. The trouble is that then disadvantages a whole load of other people because of all the benefits that text chat give for engagement, for concentration, for being able to ask questions or clarification, even being able to say, can you slow down because I'm struggling to process what you're talking about, or can you speak louder because I'm hearing impaired? So there is a balancing act to do. Ben's asking for some clarity on Xerti on the Learning Apps website. No, it's not the PowerPoint. For PowerPoint, I'm using Google Slides. Everything else is in Xerti. So the one you're looking at the moment, the Google Slides are behind that. They're just my top level points. Everything else is in this Xerti resource, which has got those little quizzy things in it as well. And it's got other elements embedded in it. So give value for all, and that can be a compromise, and it might need discussion with your students. Be absolutely clear on expectations, and you need to talk about behaviours right at the beginning if you think it's likely to be an issue. You know your groups, or you may know your groups, so do talk about that. For example, we've already done this at the beginning because Chrissy talked about how we would like you to all switch your microphones to mute and gave the reason for it. And I said I would like you to concentrate on putting things in the chat pane and not worrying about spelling, because I wanted that kind of rapid turnover of people getting their thoughts and ideas down. So do be clear on expectations. And if you need to make an adaptation, because if, for example, somebody had alerted us on this seminar that there's going to be somebody who's profoundly deaf, they're going to be getting somebody helping them in terms of text streaming, auto captioning, sorry, not auto captioning, manual captioning. If that meant I needed to speak a bit slower, or if I've got a blind person, which means I'm describing to you what is patently obvious to you as a picture on the diagram, and I'm saying, on the screen you can see a picture, and you're all thinking, yes, I know we can see a picture. If you need to think about the transparency, because if I'm speaking more slowly, if I'm repeating things that go in the text chat pane, or I'm describing pictures on the screen, in a way that might be a bit unusual, then it's helpful for my participants to know about that, so they're wholly supportive and not going to be, not going to be resentful. That may require some discussions with the relevant students. So I've got some ideas there about how you might approach that. At the end of the day, if they don't want you to say anything, that's something you need to respect. But I think there's real value, certainly the webinars I've done, where I've had to say, we're doing this a bit differently because we've been asked, and we don't have to say who it is, but that really does help. And people are pretty good generally when they know. Okay, so that's the preparatory bit. Then the presenting bit. This first bit, make sure there's a spare facilitator who can focus on either technical or accessibility issues. I know that's not going to be possible for many of you. However, there may be ways that you can get around that to some extent by doing some team teaching wherever possible, so that two of you are presenting and one of you's delivering and the other one's supporting, and then the other time it's the other way around. But I know that there are really big practical issues like that. So the other approach is to actually involve the students themselves. You're likely to have some students that are more tech savvy than others, or some students that just like to be helpful. So actually ask the students and say, this is tough doing this because I'm having to do this and that and the other all at the same time. is there anybody that would be happy to support, just to be my technical support team, or to help people who are less confident and getting lost? And again, it's building that community. There's lots of other points there. You can send people copies of the presentation in advance if it helps. If you're using particular system features that are critical to the presentation, like quizzes, polls, etc., then you might want to have an advanced test with a disabled user just to make sure that it will work for them. And then all these other points are, they're very simple. They're not difficult to do. They don't involve particular skills, but they are tweaks to your pedagogy. And I think this building in staging points is actually useful for a lot of people. We've done this particularly when we've had deaf people or blind people on sessions, and so we needed to stop, give a reflection time, get those people to be able to respond if they wanted to. But some of the feedback was that actually a lot of people valued that. And then simple things like, if any of you were, really dyslexic and you really, it was going to be a nightmare for you typing stuff in there, just give you the open mic. You'd be the only person that would have open mic access, and you'd agree to mute it if your dog barked, that sort of thing. So there are lots of different ideas there. I won't go through the other elements now, because I want to just have a look at some of the practicalities. So we've looked at the principles there, and now again we'll flick back to the future teacher resource, but to a different part. What I want to look at now is this whole thing about learning from others, and there's a lot that you can learn just by either sitting in on somebody else's presentation, planning a presentation together, getting feedback from learners. And one of the things that I really encourage is if you can find the sweet spot between finding a model that works, so you can do the same kind of thing each time, and it pretty much works. But by finding that sweet spot of the same model, instead of fossilizing the sweet spot, try to then do some experimenting around it. So you're experimenting within a safe zone where the webinar basically will work and is basically sustainable. But then you try other techniques. So you're experimenting around safety. And that way you'll make some mistakes, but you only learn from mistakes. It's what we tell the students all the time: learn from your mistakes. And then we become risk averse and don't want to make them. So make mistakes, learn from them, but you'll also find that some things work really well. So let's have a quick look then at the elements here. So again, when on this resource, and again I'll pop the text chat, pop it in the text chat thing. For that particular page, and there's just a few pages you can click through with me as I do it. But on so these are the three of us that present the Future Teacher sessions, and they're all free webinars. It started as a European funded resource project, and that funding ran out a year ago, but because it's built up a good community, the three of us still do it on a pro bono basis once a month. But you can have a look. So these are screenshots, and you can click on any of those screenshots of my colleague Ron, and he's a bit of a techie, geeky person, and so he's got some really nice setup here. In fact, he's one of the developers of the Xerti tool, the one that we're looking at here. But that's his setup with the reasons for it. Mine, by contrast, is not. I've changed it around slightly now because I've gone from a standing desk to a sitting desk so that I can have many plants around me. But again, you can see all sorts of things in there, and hints, just helpful hints. Like in this particular one, there was one webinar. I've been fiddling around with blue tack beforehand, just bored in a meeting, and I'd made some little blue tack horns that I put on my head. I completely forgot about them, and then I started a webinar. Just as I switched on, I'm switching on the video, I glanced in the mirror, and there I saw blue tack horns on my head. No! So just a simple thing about making sure you've got a mirror nearby so that you can see what you look like. Nothing embarrassing is going to happen. So have a look at that setup. My colleague Lillian, who hot desks at the University of York, so she's got a bag of stuff that she just carries around from place to place. That's probably more like your studio might be. So those are some ideas that you could get from us. Optimize, so 16 to 23. I was going to have a look at another couple of slides here. In terms of learning from other people on this resource, again, I won't go into it now, but there are some case studies. Every one of our Xerte resources has got little kind of contributors, case studies. So have a look through those, play those in your own time. So we've got 3 different people there, and that will give you a sense as to how they run their own sessions. So let's move slightly on from looking at the webinar itself. So we've looked at the mechanics of the webinar, the functionality of the webinar. We've looked at almost the pedagogy of the webinar and the community social learning of the webinar. So what I want to do in this final section is to look at accessibility as a way of thinking outside the box. So there's another resource that, again, part of the Future Teacher series. So I'll drag this one across. It's on inclusive teaching and learning. Let's just size it so it fits neatly there. So on this resource, this is much more about inclusion per se. And there's a couple of elements in here that I think are worth you looking at. And certainly when I talked to Chrissy before we set this up, she thought it was useful. So the first thing is just to think about the media that you use. So again, we had some discussions about types of media that you might embed. You might have interactivities in a webinar. You might have little video clips you show, or you have links to. You might have images, graphs, etc. You might have text. What I've done in this, and this is quite old now, but I found it served me very well. I put together a sort of series of radar diagrams where the length of the line is in proportion to the preference of a user with that disability for that particular type of resource. So 5 types of resource: text-based resources, image-based, audio-based, video, and interactivity. And so if you go through these, you can then work out, okay, who would prefer what? So for a blind person, they might prefer audio. Okay, text could be brilliant so long as it's digital and not just a piece of paper, and so long as it's digital text that's well structured in terms of accessibility, with image descriptions and with heading structures, etc. We can do the same for deaf, and I won't go into all the details as to why these preferences are. You can read that in your own time. For dyslexic, you have actually a broader sense of the things that they would prefer to have, and text is not generally one of them. People with learning difficulties wouldn't apply in your context, but motor difficulty, I thought I had motor difficulties in there. No, I haven't got motor difficulties in there. But what's interesting is when you put all of them together, you find that text comes out as the one that is the least preferred medium for most types of disabilities, which kind of begs the question, the slightly ironic question, why is so much education predicated around the monoculture of text? And so it's really an encouragement there to say, look, people might say to you, oh, text only is more accessible. Text only is not more accessible to most disabled students. So experiment with audio, experiment with video, experiment with images, with interactivities, etc. You won't get it right all the time for everybody, and you do need to be mindful of the fact that if I have a fantastic video, but it requires you being able to see what's going on there, so it's not a talking head, for example, it requires you to be able to see quite intricate things happening, or it requires you to hear a really detailed, slightly dense, complex narrative, then I could be losing out on certain students being able to access that. So think about that. Think about alternatives, maybe a transcript, maybe auto transcripts, auto captions like we're doing at the moment, may be sufficient. I've seen these up to about 90% accurate. I've seen them down to about 30% accurate. But even a key point summary for video or audio, you know, these are the main teaching points to take away. That would help everybody. So let's, again, on this part here, one of the things that I think is really important about accessibility is it's not to do with disability teams and it's not to do with technical standards. Okay, that's an exaggeration. You know, technical teams and standards and disability teams do have something to do with accessibility, but it's only a part of the picture. The real difference to inclusion is what goes on in the classroom, the seminar, the practical room, the field course, etc. And there's this phrase that I often use, pedagogical inclusion, where you think about the media. So here's a nice screenshot from, I think this was a university course, but it might have been a college course, where instead of just PDF, PDF, PDF online, we had web page links, we had reports, we had slideshows, video clips, all sorts. That range of media that just means that nobody's hitting the same barrier all the time. The scaffolding around the content, that's really important. Being explicit about marking rubrics, being explicit about assignment purposes. I made an online course many years ago where I had a page of all the activities that were required that week, and for each of those activities I was explicit about the skills that activity was attempting to develop, that I would be looking to mark them for. So that kind of scaffolding just helps, and again it kind of blurs into being explicit, just making things clear, because for a student knowledge is an amorphous thing. Sometimes for lecturers it's a bit amorphous, but the more we can understand it and scaffold it, the better. Keeping things active, there's a resource that's it's a bit of a gap fill. This is not a university style resource, but there's other ways you can be active, active and collaborative. Now you're already thinking, what's that got to do with online learning? I'm sure all of those work for the simple reason they are brain-based approaches. They work because that's the way our brains work. This is just good teaching and learning. So just the final, I think this is probably my final slide. Let's check. The final slide. Now, oh no, hold on, am I going the wrong direction? That's the problem. Yeah, so we've done that. Yes, just so the final part, and again, it's in this inclusion resource. It's number 16. You could have the most amazingly accessible webinar in the world with the most amazingly accessible resources, and the students don't benefit because they just don't have the skill themselves to know that the document that you've linked them to can have colors change, can magnify and reflow, can be read out loud to them just using the inbuilt Office tools. Nobody's told them that. You could have students accessing your online resources that you link to from the webinar, not realizing that on that web page that they find hard to read because it's a particular color contrast that doesn't suit them, that they could change the colors, they could have the text read out to them, they could declutter a page, they could instantly find their way through a really long, dense 30 screenfuls journal article by clicking on a tool like Headings Map that just pulls out all the headings on the left, and that's the bit I needed. I wanted data methods. Click on there and they've done it. So there's a lot of things students don't know because nobody's told them. So, and even disabled students, they are, believe me, they are not experts in the technology they need. They're experts in the technology that somebody told them that they need, but they don't know all the functionality inbuilt into your ebook platform, your journals platform, your this, that, and the other, because nobody's told them. They won't know. So there's a few things for you to look at there that I think could be useful. In terms of the other future teacher resources, there's a link there if you wanted to join the Future Teacher GISC mail list, and then you'll hear about other upcoming sessions. And that's it from me. I am Alistair McNaught, and that's one of the many things that I do. So it's over. Yes, slides and links are available. Let's do that now. I can give you the slides straight away.
We'll also be putting the recording on our YouTube channel, so if you want to listen to any of it again.
So these are the Google Slides coming in now. And then those resources, the Future Teacher, the two packages that we were looking at there. This is the inclusion one. So inclusive practice. And then the other one, the webinars one, was this one. So you have everything, everything you need there. Elizabeth, so if I have a look, so I'll look through some of these questions here, and if I've missed any, Chrissy will help me find. Kathy was asking, is the Xerti Toolkit, the one that's on the screen at the minute, is that a classroom management system? No, it's not. It's, I suppose you could think of it as a little bit like, it's an online resource. Basically, it's a way of creating an online interactive resource in which you can do certain things natively within, using the templates that it comes with. So you can do drag and drop, multiple choice, etc. You can embed YouTube videos. You can create simple tabs, even quite complex tabs. So it's an online content creation tool is probably the best way of thinking about it, but it can also host other embedded web pages in there, so it's pretty handy. Elizabeth says, what software do I use for captions? In this case, I'm just using the inbuilt captions that come with Google Slides. When you go to present view on Google Slides, I can show you at the bottom here, there's the option for captions. I can have them at the top, at the bottom, medium size, etc. Have them on, have them off. Microsoft PowerPoint Online does exactly the same sort of thing. There are third-party tools like Otter AI that would do that. It's kind of semi-accurate, you will have noticed. It will misinterpret things, but it can be better than nothing if it picks up your voice. By scaffolding, what I meant by scaffolding is the way in which you, technically it's about scaffolding the learning. So if you imagine building a house, you put the scaffolding around there. The scaffolding doesn't hold up the house, but it helps you add the different bricks as you're going up. And it's a bit like that pedagogically. So the scaffolding would be when I set an assignment for my students, there is a clarity about what that assignment is about, what skills I'm looking for, what the marking scheme is going to be, and there might also be some examples. Here's a model answer that's really good. Here's a sample answer that's really bad, and giving people a range of different things so they can then begin to get that metacognition as to what it is that makes the learning happen. So we've done the slides and that's, 4 new messages. Let's have a look. That's it, I think.
Does anyone else have any questions they want to ask in the chat, either or by raising their hand and coming on the video to do so? I think we've got 3 or 4 minutes left. Can't see any raised hands at the moment.
Then it's time for a coffee break.
Well, thanks, Alistair. That was really interesting, especially the captions. I hadn't realised they were so easy to do. Oh, hang on, we do have something just come in from Miranda.
Miranda's asked about resources tailored more to learning differences rather than physical ones. If I just show you on the screen quickly, Miranda, The XERTI, the Future Teacher resources are part of a big program. It's not specifically about accessibility at all. It's just that because I'm an accessibility specialist and I was one of the people involved in the program, I have ensured that accessibility and inclusion are woven throughout. And it's not just blind and partially sighted. It's got, we talk about what would suit people with Asperger's, people with ADHD, people just from a different cultural background, different linguistic background. So that's kind of threaded throughout all of those. So they're not specifically on accessibility and inclusion for sensory difficulties. But if you have a look here, there's these are the 17, I think. Is it 17 or might be 19 that we've done? We're redoing them at the moment. Next month, this month, 26, we're doing self-assessment and mastery learning. So each one of these we're revisiting basically 2 years on from the original. The original content and original recording is still there. We're now revisiting it, updating links, getting new speakers, and attracting a new audience. And these have had thousands of hits on the resources and the videos. So yeah, flipped classroom, knowing what they know, that's about almost getting feedback as you go along to check that the learning you think you've just explained has actually been received in that way. Collaborative teaching and learning strategies to support reading, writing, mastery learning, social media in teaching and learning, inclusive practice using rich media, images, audio, video. And all of these are a whole mix of practical, I mean, it's like the sorts of things you've seen in that resource. There's the highly practical stuff. There's also quite theoretical stuff because we have a very broad audience, from the people who are professional learning technologists who want to be able to say, show me the technology, through to people who are researchers in various areas who want to say, show me the research. So they are very broad, but everything from assessment, technology enhanced programs, designing for technology enhanced programs, and designing and creating online learning activities are well worth looking at. They've got lots of guidance on accessibility, as well as lots of good pedagogical guidance. So they're all there, and if you click on any of those, if we went to that one, it would take you to the presentation and resources. You can open the XERTI resource in a new window. There's always an option to do that, view in a new window, or you can view it embedded. And then there's the recording that took place when we did it originally. How can I save the chat? It's a really good question. Now, there is a way of saving the chat. And, well, the cheating way of saving the chat, I think, is to do Control-A and then Control-C. But I did have a feeling you could save the chat as well.
We'll save the chat, and what we do after these sessions, when we send you the YouTube link, it'll be in about a week's time. We'll also send you a file with a copy of the chat.
Okay, yeah.
Because it doesn't. A few people are saying that they aren't able to do it.
Oh, that's interesting, because I can select it. But have you got that selected then, Chrissy?
Yeah, it saves for us automatically, I think, with the recording. So yeah, so we'll send that to everyone who was registered when we put the video up on YouTube.
Yep. So there's a few more questions. So just if anybody else wanted the answers. So Justin said, everything we've seen today designed and delivered by a combination of Google Slides and XERTI. Yep. XERTI is XERTE. But it's a strange word. It's a made-up word. So yes, absolutely right. That's exactly what you've seen. Emil, that's a really interesting point. How much more time do you spend on average in preparing accessible webinars? I think you do. Well, it's a difficult one because you do, in a sense, because the first time you go through it, obviously you're having to recognize that certain things won't be accessible in the way they were. I think what happens is that you spend more time, but it pays back later, because in a face-to-face session, you still have students that tune out, that miss something, that can't keep up, and so on. And what you never do is you never find out about that. Because that would mean them coming to you and saying, "Look, I'm sorry, I got a text from my mum and she's poorly or something, and so I missed that bit in the middle of the lecture. Could you go over it again?" That's not going to happen. But if any of you had your kids come up to you halfway through this session and interrupt you for 10 minutes, then you know that you can go back to the slides and you've got it. So I think there are benefits, but I don't want to dodge the question. I think preparing accessible webinars takes longer, not least because in a face-to-face session, you can potentially come alongside as a human being and say, "Did you get that?" Or, "You look like you're struggling. Do you want a hand?" But I think a good webinar can be a lot more accessible than a good face-to-face session, potentially. Anna, I have no idea. No idea how to overcome bad connection or not good internet, and that the technical issues are definitely going to be the biggest problems. I think the key thing would be to try to, well, have things available online as a backup, so that, or record it so that they could look at it in their own time without their bandwidth having to cope with screen sharing, audio, and something else all at the same time. So try to record it, try to have the resources separate, and probably reduce the delivery to the bare minimum. No video, just a bit of audio, and probably not screen sharing if you can get around it, but that's, it's tricky. To do it well, Sine, apologies if I'm not very good at pronouncing, but have a look again at the resource. Go back and have a look at the resource where you saw Lillian's. Lillian does it really well, and she has her stuff in a bag. Ideally, you want to have 2 monitors. That definitely helps. But you can have 1 monitor and an iPad, and there's a little apps you can get that can allow you to be looking at one screen in an iPad and the other screen on the monitor. But ideally, 2 monitors are helpful. Right, I think we're done. Yeah. Why are 2 monitors good? Why are 2 monitors good is because it saves me having to look, having to find things behind the stack of windows, as it were. So I look on one window. I've got my the web pages that I want to show you, like the one that's on at the moment. As soon as I'm ready, I take it off, and you're back on the slides. And then I'm concentrating on the slides. As soon as I've got something else I want to show you, I bring it back on. It just makes life easy for me. Right, I think we're all going to go and have a cup of tea now.